The night the outlaw bride walked into the Longhorn Saloon, Dodge City felt wrong in a way folks couldn't name. The air was too still, the lanterns too dim, the laughter too forced, as if the whole town sensed that joy had wandered into dangerous territory. The wedding guests gathered beneath rafters stained with the smoke of 100 gunfights, boots tapping against warped floorboards still scarred from knife duels and spilled moonshine. Yet somehow the place looked dressed up, candles flickering inside whiskey bottles, a frayed banner stretched above the bar, and a piano man hammering out a shaky waltz no one could quite dance to. At the center of it all stood Clara Ellison, a bride wrapped in white and ash, her veil catching sparks of lamplight like frost on wolf fur. Clara did not smile the way brides are meant to smile. Her mouth held a quiet curve that looked borrowed, something she had practiced in the mirror of a hotel room hours before. Her hands were steady, too steady for a woman about to bind her life to a man, but not too steady for someone who had known rifles, revolvers, and decisions that left people buried under prairie grass. She moved through the crowd with a grace that made even drunk cowhands step aside. Some whispered that she carried sorrow in her bones. Others said she carried something far heavier. Those who watched closely noticed her eyes drifting again and again to the bar, where a blue glass bottle sat tucked behind a tower of punch bowls. Easy to miss, unless you were looking for it. Deputy James Cutter, the groom, arrived late, dust on his boots and apology stitched into every line of his face. He kissed Clara's hand, but she did not blush. He thanked the sheriff for keeping the peace tonight, though everyone knew Dodge City could barely keep the peace for an hour. He raised his glass to the crowd, and the saloon erupted in cheers that tried too hard to sound honest. Behind him, the bartender wiped sweat from his brow, the band tuned up for another crooked dance, and somewhere outside a horse snorted as if warning the whole town to run. The ceremony moved forward with the awkward rhythm of something pretending to be joyful. A preacher recited his lines while watching the door, half expecting trouble to wander in with a six-shooter. The guests shifted and fanned themselves with stained hats, whispering rumors about who Clara used to be, who James had been before the badge, and why the wedding felt more like a ceasefire than a celebration. When the vows were spoken, Clara's voice did not tremble. It rolled out smooth, like a river that had never known hesitation. But James's voice cracked once, just once, when he said her name. A few guests noticed. Fewer understood. Then the saloon doors creaked open. A late traveler stepped in, trail dust swirling at his boots, hat pulled low, eyes fixed on Clara with a look that held both history and warning. His presence bent the atmosphere like a storm cloud drifting over a campfire. Clara blinked, swallowing something tight in her throat. James stiffened, hand lowering toward the pistol at his hip. No one spoke, but every heart in the room thudded against its cage. Clara reached the bar first. The punch bowl shimmered under lamplight, ruby red and innocent enough. She lifted the blue glass bottle with the softness of someone picking wildflowers instead of altering fate. A single tilt of her wrist sent a thread of clear liquid curling into the bowl, swallowed instantly by the red tide. She replaced the bottle, smoothed her dress, and turned to the room with a smile, far too calm for a bride surrounded by dancing shadows. "Anticipate," announcing. "Drink up," she said, her voice ringing across the hall like a hymn sung before a funeral. By the time the first glass was emptied, the piano man's fingers slipped, the sheriff's knees buckled, and someone whispered that the air tasted strange, too sweet, too warm. Lights flickered, glasses fell, bodies swayed, and Clara, beautiful, unshaken Clara, stood in the center of Dodge City's grandest celebration, watching destiny unravel exactly as she planned. Before Clara Ellison became the bride who turned a wedding into a wake, she was a barefoot girl running along the banks of the Arkansas River, where the mud was thick, the storms were quick-tempered, and life carved its lessons straight into the hide of anyone unlucky enough to be born on its edge. Her father, Samuel Ellison, was a rancher who believed children should work before they walked and pray only after every other option had failed. Her mother died during a winter that froze cattle standing upright, and by spring, Clara had learned silence the way other girls learn needlework. The West did not allow softness. It shaped its daughters with the same violence it used on its sons. Their cabin sat miles from the nearest town, surrounded by tall prairie grass that whispered when the wind rose. Clara woke every morning to the sound of coyotes circling the property, Some nights the howls came so close she swore she could feel their breath through the walls. Her father taught her to load a rifle long before he taught her scripture, claiming God could wait, but wolves could not. She learned to breathe slowly, to keep her aim steady, and to never look away from anything capable of killing her. It was a lesson she carried all the way to Dodge City. By 12, Clara could shoot better than most grown men. By 14, she could ride without saddle or fear. But beneath all the grit was a heart that trusted too deeply. When a drifter came through their land, wounded, charming, and desperate, she believed every word he offered. He told her stories of Kansas City lights and Colorado gold mines, of towns where women wore silk and men tipped their hats like gentlemen. She nursed him back from fever, wove him a scarf against the winter cold, and listened as he promised he'd return for her. When spring came, he vanished like smoke, stealing her father's best horse and Clara's only notion of tenderness. Her father called it a lesson. Clara called it the beginning of truth. After Samuel Ellison was trampled breaking a new stallion, Clara found herself alone with nothing but debts and a bad history tied to her name. The ranch was seized by creditors, and she drifted through frontier towns trying to trade her skills for survival. Hard winters hardened her further. Men who saw a lone girl saw opportunity, and she learned to strike first. Rumors spread faster than she did. A freight wagon set ablaze in Trinidad, a ranch foreman shot outside Santa Fe, and a Pinkerton agent found half dead in a ditch, mumbling her description. Historians still argue what Clara truly did and what was pinned on her out of fear. But the West has a way of turning battered girls into myths long before they turn into outlaws. Yet Clara was not born cruel. She never took joy in violence. What she carried instead was a deep, hollow ache, carved by every broken promise, every night spent cold, every hand that reached for her with hunger instead of kindness. She moved like someone searching for a life she once glimpsed but never touched. And then she met James Cutter. James found her in Pueblo, sitting outside a saloon that smelled of whiskey and defeat. He offered her water instead of liquor, asked her name without demanding anything in return, and walked her to her lodging with the caution of a man raised by respect. In him, Clara saw the faint shape of safety, fragile, unfamiliar, dangerous in its own way. She didn't trust him at first, and yet she wanted to. For a time, they fit together like two wounded creatures sharing shelter from the same storm. But the West does not let the past loosen its grip. The man she once saved along the Arkansas, the one who stole her father's horse, the one she almost loved, returned to her life in a way that tore open scars she had barely learned to hide. He carried secrets, lies, and a truth that would unravel everything she hoped for with James Cutter. And it was that truth, not madness, not evil, that would one day lead Clara Ellison to Dodge City, to a wedding she never believed in, to a blue glass bottle behind a bar, and to a vengeance the frontier had unknowingly raised her for. Before his wedding night turned into a graveyard tale, James Cutter was a man who believed in the weight of promises. He grew up in the dust between Wichita and the open plains, raised by a mother who read scripture by lamplight and a father who kept his horse saddled year-round, claiming trouble rode faster than prayer. James was not the fastest draw, nor the bravest rider, nor even the most respected lawman in Kansas. But he carried a kind of steady decency that made folks trust him, even when trust was a rare currency on the frontier. By the time he pinned the badge of deputy sheriff to his chest, the medal had more scratches than shine, a relic worn by men who died trying to hold back a world built on bullets and broken codes. James Cutter met Clara Ellison long before Dodge City ever whispered their names together. It was in Pueblo, after a night of gunfire left the saloon walls peppered with holes and the sheriff bleeding on the floor. She stood outside in the cold, hands wrapped around her ribs as if protecting a wound only she could feel. James approached her gently, offering his canteen and a quiet place to sit. When she took the water, her fingers brushed his knuckles, soft, cold, trembling. It was the smallest touch, But for James, it settled into him like a scripture carved into bone. He noticed everything about her, how she flinched at the sound of boots behind her, how she kept her back against walls, how she looked at the horizon like she was waiting for someone she knew would never come. James never asked about her past. The West had taught him that some stories were landmines, best left undisturbed. Instead, he offered what little he had: safety, warmth, and the faint belief that a life without running might be possible. But Clara was not built for stillness, not yet. There were nights she disappeared without warning, returning with dust on her hem and shadows in her expression. The rumors of her past drifted through taverns like smoke: fires she supposedly started, men she supposedly shot, crimes she never denied and never confirmed. James heard them all. He chose to believe none. Then came the night of the confession. Clara stood in his doorway, moonlight spilling over her face like a blessing the sky regretted giving. She told him about the drifter who'd passed through her childhood like a curse, the same man who'd returned months ago with threats sharpened by years on the wrong side of survival. He wanted money, revenge, and Clara's silence about things she had seen him do, things that could hang a man twice over. James, who had always believed the badge meant something, promised he would protect her. He held her as she trembled, swore he'd take her far from danger, swore she'd never have to run again. But the world shifts differently for men like James. He believed in the law. The drifter believed in leverage. One rode with honor, the other rode with secrets. A week later, the drifter cornered James behind a stable yard in Trinidad, revealing a truth that hit harder than any bullet. Clara hadn't just known him. Clara had once loved him. Worse, she had once ridden with him, stolen with him, maybe even killed with him. The drifter called her his unfinished debt, a woman who belonged to him by suffering and by history. He told James she was a liar, a thief, a ghost wearing a woman's skin. He wanted her back, not for love, but for punishment. James punched him hard enough to break skin and silence, but the words had already rooted themselves in his mind. When Clara asked him days later if he still believed in her, he hesitated. Only for a breath, only for a heartbeat. But it was enough. A doubt barely visible, yet bright as a lantern in the dark. That hesitation shattered her. She left him without goodbye, convinced no man would carry her truth and stay. Months passed before James found her again, this time in Dodge City, tired, thinner, but willing to try once more. He proposed not out of impulse, but out of fear that she'd vanish forever if he didn't anchor her to something real. Yet on the night he slipped the ring onto her finger, the drifter arrived in town with a secret James never expected, a secret that made Clara's hand go cold in his own. And by the time James Cutter realized what that secret meant, the wedding punch had already turned sweet, and death was already settling into the Longhorn Saloon. Dodge City had seen blood before. It had seen shootouts that left the streets slick by sunrise, cattle stampedes that crushed men beneath hooves, and winter fevers that emptied entire boarding houses. But it had never seen anything like the morning after Clara Ellison's wedding. When dawn broke over Front Street, it did not rise golden. It rose gray, as if the sky itself refused to bear witness to what lay inside the Longhorn Saloon. The wind pushed dust across the ground in slow, mournful spirals, carrying with it the faint sweetness still lingering from the poisoned punch that turned celebration into a mass grave. Sheriff Grant McHale was the first to step through the doors, boots crunching over shattered glass and overturned chairs. The lanterns had burned low, casting long shadows over bodies slumped across tables and sprawled on the floor. Men who'd once survived bar brawls, buffalo hunts, and border skirmishes now lay frozen in their wedding clothes, faces pale and lips blue. The piano man was still seated at his instrument, fingers resting on keys as if he'd died mid-song. The preacher lay curled beside the altar, Bible fallen open to a page about mercy no one would ever read again. And at the center of the devastation, where the dance floor had been, the punch bowl sat half empty, glimmering like a stained glass heart cracked open. Outside, whispers spread faster than the news could be verified. Ranch hands staggered out of bunkhouses clutching hats to their chests. Merchants barricaded their storefronts. Railroad men refused to load freight until they knew whether the water, the air, or even the soil itself had been tainted. By noon, Dodge City resembled a quarantined battlefield. Mothers kept their children indoors. Travelers rode around the town as if it carried plague. The bodies were moved with the caution of handling dynamite, each one examined by the county doctor who muttered the same phrase over and over: poison, clean, swift, intentional. Some claimed Clara had fled through the back alley before the first man collapsed. Others swore they saw her riding out of town at a calm trot, veil trailing behind her like ghost silk. A few insisted she had stayed until the last heartbeat faded, standing quietly near the stage with her hands folded in front of her, as if attending her own funeral. The sheriff found only one clear sign of her: a single bridle glove on the bar, dropped beside the very bottle that had sealed the town's fate. Blue glass, no fingerprints, no hesitation. The economic wound struck just as hard as the moral one. Cattle drivers delayed entire routes rather than pass through the poisoned town. Saloons shut their doors. Gamblers moved their tables upriver. Even the railroad, greedy as a starving wolf, halted construction for fear that the story would spread east and ruin investor confidence. For a place built on grit and stubborn survival, Dodge City suddenly looked fragile, almost breakable, like a beast brought to its knees by a woman most folks barely knew. But rumors, more than death, are what truly reshape the frontier. Within days, the tragedy twisted into half-truths and legends. Some said Clara had been wronged by her groom, that James Cutter had uncovered something dark in her past and threatened to expose it. Others claimed the drifter, her phantom from years ago, had forced her hand with a secret that would have destroyed them both. A few whispered darker tales, that Clara was cursed and had brought a plague meant for the man who betrayed her, and Dodge City had simply gotten in the way. What mattered most to the survivors was not why she did it, but how easily she had done it. A woman dressed in white, walking softly, speaking gently, and killing an entire room before anyone thought to fear her. For a frontier long accustomed to violence arriving on horseback with guns drawn, this quieter method of death forced everyone to reconsider who the real threats were. By sunset, the sheriff lit lamps along Front Street and nailed fresh wanted posters onto every post from the jailhouse to the dry goods store. They showed a face half-shadowed by a bridal veil. The ink was still wet when he whispered, "No one disappears that clean." But he was wrong, because somewhere beyond the edge of town, Clara Ellison was already miles away, riding steady, breathing steady, carrying secrets heavier than the saddle beneath her. And the frontier was already beginning to understand that the outlaw bride was far from finished. The wind cut across the plains like a sharpened knife as Clara Ellison rode through the moonlight, her wedding dress torn at the hem, boots caked in prairie dust, and her veil flapping like a ghost in pursuit. Dodge City had vanished behind her, but its screams trailed her like shadows, whispering in every gust. Every so often she glanced over her shoulder, half expecting a posse, half expecting nothing at all. Because out here, in the endless prairie where coyote cries tangled with the howl of the wind, the West had a way of hiding the dead, the guilty, and the hunted alike. She was all three. The first bounty hunters caught sight of her at sunrise, riding along the Cimarron River with the calculated calm of someone who had stared down death and refused to blink. They thought to chase, guns raised, hearts hammering like tribal drums, but by the time they reached where she had been 10 minutes prior, all they found was a trail of hoofprints leading to the edge of a sudden, shallow ravine. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed her whole. Some swore they saw a white shimmer leap across the water before it vanished into reeds, and the story became the first of many legends. Clara Ellison, part woman, part wind, impossible to trap, impossible to forgive. She moved like a shadow among ranchlands, trading towns under cover of night. She drank from streams no man dared approach, slept in haylofts above barns abandoned for fear of her name, and wore disguises stitched from the remnants of dead travelers' clothes. Her face changed under dirt and soot. Her veil became a scarf. Her hands carried the faint scars of 1,000 small battles. Everywhere she went, rumors of the wedding massacre followed like an echo in a canyon. Some claimed she was still searching for James Cutter, that she wanted to punish him for loving her too late. Others whispered she had a new victim in mind, that she was counting down towns like a gambler counting cards, waiting for the next poor soul unlucky enough to cross her path. And the truth lay somewhere between. A woman carrying vengeance, grief, and survival wrapped into a single, unyielding spine. The West tried to follow her. Posses formed in Abilene, Amarillo, even as far south as the edges of the Texas Panhandle. They rode hard, guns ready, whistles shrill in the night. But Clara's knowledge of the land, her instincts honed from years of running from men who would kill without conscience, made her invisible. Rivers were her cloaks, canyons her alleys, wind her warning bell. She moved like smoke, vanishing before trackers even glimpsed the glint of her pistol. And then came the night near Dodge City, weeks later, that would cement her legend. Clara rode into a town too small to matter, seeking shelter in a deserted chapel. The moon painted her in silver and ash, and for the first time since the wedding, she allowed herself a moment to breathe. That's when he appeared, the drifter from her past, the one whose shadow had haunted every memory since childhood. He had followed her across the plains, relentless as a storm. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, time froze. No words were exchanged. Both knew the truth. Some debts were not meant to be paid, some histories not meant to be rewritten. The drifter moved first, hand on his pistol, but Clara had already drawn hers, the metal glinting under moonlight. One shot echoed like a cannon blast. Another answered. By the time the town stirred, both figures had vanished, leaving only scorched earth and whispers. Some claimed the drifter was dead. Others swore he had survived. Clara's presence, however, was the undeniable mark. No town would ever forget her. No posse could contain her. And the West had learned a hard truth, that a woman could wield fear as effortlessly as a man wielded a six-shooter. Legends say she crossed the Cimarron River one final time, disappearing into the fog that rises over the plains at dawn. Some claim she drowned, taking her secrets with her. Others insist she lives, wandering cemeteries and abandoned towns in her bridal dress, a specter who punishes those foolish enough to betray love, loyalty, or trust. Every so often, a settler glimpses a white shape on the horizon, hears the faint sound of heels on wooden floors where no floor exists, and remembers that one night in Dodge City when a wedding became a massacre. The outlaw bride never returned, yet she never truly left. Dodge City remained, scarred and haunted, forever knowing that some legends are born not from birth, but from betrayal, rage, and a poisoned, swollen glass raised high in the hands of a woman who had learned to survive the West in every way it could kill. And somewhere out there, beyond rivers, ridges, and windswept valleys, Clara Ellison rides still, silent, relentless, and unstoppable. A ghost stitched from vengeance and sorrow, waiting for the next story to call her name.